In July 2025, during the real flash floods that tore through central Texas, the sky over the Guadalupe River changed faster than anyone could understand. At first, people thought it was just another heavy summer storm, the kind Texans are used to waiting out. But that afternoon, the clouds thickened into something else, something heavier, something that carried more water than the hills and creeks around Kerrville could possibly hold. By 6 p.m., Johnson Creek wasn't a creek anymore. It was a violent, churning river, swallowing fences, tearing up cattle gates, and pushing logs the size of telephone poles downstream. Roads buckled, bridges twisted. A dark wall of water slid across low crossings that had been dry only hours earlier. Martha Garrison, 74 years old, retired schoolteacher and lifelong hill country resident, had lived through decades of storms. She had seen the Guadalupe rise after hard rain. She had watched creeks overflow and then calm by morning. But nothing in all her years had prepared her for the moment the flood reached her. Not gradually, not with warning, but all at once, with a force that felt almost deliberate. What started as a short 15-minute drive to visit her grandson turned into a fight for her life. Her SUV lifted, the road vanished, and the river, swollen with debris, took hold of everything it touched. For the first time in her life, Martha understood how fast nature can turn on someone, and how little time a person truly has when the water decides to move. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this, and what time is it right now where you are? Flash floods in central Texas are unlike anything most people imagine. They don't build slowly and they don't send early hints. They fall from the sky in sheets so heavy that the air seems to turn solid. They rush down hillsides, gathering speed as they move through narrow valleys, picking up mud, tree limbs, barrels, and anything else that isn't rooted deeply enough to resist them. And when they finally reach the low river crossings that connect one rural road to another, they reach with full force, fast, dark, and unrestrained. During the July 2025 disaster, meteorologists measured rainfall rates so intense that radar maps struggled to update fast enough. Emergency alerts warned residents to stay home, to avoid travel, to treat every creek as dangerous. Some people did, many didn't, but even those who tried to be cautious discovered that the storm didn't care. Roads that had been safe 20 minutes earlier were gone. Pavement was ripped up as if someone had taken a giant hand and peeled it back. Cars disappeared in the colorless blur of the rising current. Entire neighborhoods lost electricity as transformers blew and tree limbs fell across power lines. Local firefighters later said the river didn't rise. It arrived all at once. Martha Garrison had lived long enough to know the rhythms of weather in the hill country. She trusted the land. She trusted her own judgment. When the rain began, she didn't feel fear. She felt familiarity. But the storm that day wasn't one of those predictable temporary downpours. It was something else, something that loaded the air with a pressure she hadn't felt since she was a child. She should have waited at home. She knew that later. But her grandson was expecting her, and the wooden box she carried felt important enough to risk a short drive. She didn't realize that every road leading out of Kerrville was minutes away from becoming part of the river. When Martha left her house that evening, the rain had already settled into a steady, angry rhythm. It didn't fall in drops anymore. It came down in sheets, the kind that turned the windshield into a shifting, translucent wall no matter how fast the wipers moved. Her small stone house near the outskirts of Kerrville stood quiet behind her, its porch light flickering as water pooled around the base of the steps. Inside the SUV, the air smelled faintly of old upholstery and cedar. The seatbelt clicked against her shoulder as she adjusted it. Her hands, veined and steady from years of teaching, tightened lightly on the steering wheel. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. She had driven in weather like this many times before. It was part of life in the hill country. Storms came, storms went. You learned to respect them, not fear them. At first, the drive seemed manageable. The main road still carried traffic. Headlights cut through the haze, and the rumble of passing trucks gave her a sense of shared safety. If other drivers were still out here, it couldn't be that bad. But as she made the turn toward the narrower rural road that led to Ingram, she noticed the difference immediately. The water no longer slid harmlessly across the pavement. It gathered, it pooled, It moved sideways, pushed by unseen forces coming down from higher ground. She slowed to 20, then to 15. Her hands hovered over the wheel, not tense but attentive. The wooden box she'd come to deliver lay on the passenger seat wrapped in a towel. She glanced at it with a warmth that steadied her thoughts. Her grandson's 8th birthday gift, the last piece her late husband had carved. A tiny Guadalupe base leaping from stylized waves, polished smooth from years of careful handling. She imagined the boy's smile when he opened it. That alone carried her forward. Another mile passed. The rain pounded harder. The sky had darkened into an almost purple tone, the kind that meant the storm still had strength left to give. Leaves whipped across the road. The shoulders overflowed with muddy water, carrying branches and debris toward the low spots. Then she saw it. A flood warning sign blinking red on the side of the road, its light distorted by the storm. She swallowed. She'd seen these before, but rarely lit. The next bend opened to a straight stretch of road that dipped briefly before rising again. In the dip, water moved across the asphalt in a broad, rippling sheet. Not deep, but unmistakably flowing. It carried leaves and pieces of bark with it. Martha stopped. Her wipers clicked back and forth, clearing and losing visibility in cycles. The hum of the engine filled the quiet inside the car, and the rain hammered the roof with relentless force. A pickup truck approached from the far side of the crossing, headlights dim through the storm. The vehicle pushed through the water slowly, carefully, water reaching halfway up its tires. As it reached her side, the driver rolled down his window and shouted something she couldn't hear over the storm. He pointed backward toward the rising creek, shaking his head. She rolled down her window a crack. Cold spray hit her face instantly. "Turn around!" he yelled. "It's coming up too fast. Bridge might go." She nodded, and before she could say anything back, the truck roared past her, climbing the road behind. For a moment she considered doing exactly what he said. She even shifted her hand toward the gear lever. But another thought pushed into her mind, her daughter and grandson waiting. The birthday box resting on the seat. The promise she had made. She looked back at the crossing. The water was moving, but it wasn't high. Not yet. The truck had made it through. Hers was heavier than most sedans, and she would go slow, inch by inch. "I'll be careful," she whispered. "Just need to get through this part." She lowered the gears and gently pressed the accelerator. The SUV eased forward, tires slipping slightly as they entered the water. She kept the wheel centered, eyes fixed on the faint yellow line beneath the moving surface. The current pushed lightly against the front of the car, but she fought it with tiny adjustments of the wheel. Halfway through, a deep rumble rolled from upstream. She paused, heart pounding. The sound wasn't thunder. It came from the earth, through the water, through the frame of the SUV itself. She had heard descriptions of this sound before, from people who survived past floods. They said it sounded like a freight train made of water and trees. The rumble grew. The line of water at her door rose by an inch, then another. Her stomach tightened. The current shifted, hitting the SUV at an angle instead of head-on. Come on," she whispered, coaxing the vehicle forward. Then something enormous, a log, dark and thick, slammed into the upstream side of the SUV. The impact jolted her shoulder against the door. Her knee struck the console. Pain shot up her leg. She gasped. The log rolled away in the current, spinning like a toy. The force of the collision nudged the SUV offline. The tires lost traction. The road was no longer beneath them. Martha felt the moment the vehicle began to float. It was subtle at first, like the slight lift of a boat leaving shore. Then came the second shove, harder, the one that truly broke her connection to the road. The SUV rotated sideways, water rushing against the windows. Her breath caught. She tightened both hands on the wheel and braced her knees. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not now." But the river had made its choice. Another surge slammed into the rear. The SUV tilted, nose dipping downward, water spilling into the cabin through the seams of the doors. The dashboard lights flickered. The engine sputtered, choked, and died. Rain poured in through the cracked side window. Cold water surged around her legs, rising past her shins, then her knees. Her heart hammered. Her breath came in short bursts. She reached for the door handle. It refused to move. Pressure from the outside held it firmly shut. She turned toward the passenger side. Water rushed through the cracks in the window there too. She remembered something she'd taught her fourth graders during emergency preparedness lessons. Flood water pushes harder than you think. If you can't open the doors, look for the glass. Glass breaks. Lightning split the sky. For an instant, she saw the flooded road ahead. Gone. The guardrail. Gone. The creek, a roaring river, carrying entire tree limbs and pieces of fencing. Fear tightened around her chest like a band. The SUV lurched again, rolling halfway onto its side. Her shoulder hit the ceiling. The water inside reached her waist. Her right knee throbbed with deep, throbbing pain. Cold was taking her breath. With her left hand, she grabbed the headrest. With her right, she struck the already cracked passenger window with the heel of her palm. It didn't give. She hit it again. And again. Each strike sent pain shooting through her arm. The crack widened. A web of fractures spread. Then the window burst inward. A violent wave of water exploded into the cabin, slamming into her chest and face. The shock knocked the breath from her lungs. She inhaled river water, coughed, choked. Her seatbelt held her briefly in place, but the force of the incoming current pushed her sideways. She fumbled at the buckle with numb fingers, found the latch, and freed herself. Water surged up to her chin. She took one last desperate breath and shoved her body toward the opening, feeling the jagged edges bite at her palms. The SUV rolled again. The water pulled her through the shattered window, dragging her violently into the churning darkness outside. She didn't have time to scream. Cold swallowed Martha before she understood which way was up. The river gripped her with a force that felt almost purposeful, lifting her, twisting her, dragging her sideways through the darkness beneath the surface. Her back struck something hard, a branch or a piece of fencing. Her legs hit debris she couldn't see. Her fingers clawed desperately at anything they brushed, but everything slipped away. Her right knee buckled sharply when the current forced it into a painful angle. She kicked anyway, ignoring the tearing sensation that shot through the joint. Her lungs convulsed. She needed air. But opening her mouth meant drowning. Her instincts screamed. She held her breath and let the river hurl her forward. A surge pushed her upward, and her head burst above the surface. She gasped raggedly, swallowing rain and river water in the same breath. The storm slapped her face, and she coughed violently, chest burning. The moment she drew in air, another wave crashed over her, pulling her under again. Her world narrowed to cold pressure and the desperate need to reach the surface one more time. She kicked blindly. Her arms felt heavy and sluggish, her fingers numb, but she kept fighting. She resurfaced briefly, long enough to see something massive spinning toward her. A floating log, thick as a telephone pole, rushed downriver on the same current that carried her. She ducked instinctively. The log roared past less than a meter from her head, the force of its wake ripping her sideways into another current. Her breath tore from her lungs. She surfaced again, sputtering. Lightning flashed above, illuminating the swollen river in a white instant. The banks were almost unrecognizable. Water rushed through gaps where trees had stood hours earlier. Debris spun in chaotic circles. The guardrail she had driven past minutes before was gone. She wasn't swimming. She was surviving each second. Her shoulder struck something, bark. She latched on with both hands before the current pulled her away again. A fallen pecan tree lay wedged against the riverbank, its roots still clinging to mud. Branches stuck into the torrent like skeletal fingers. She wrapped her arms around the trunk, chest heaving. Rain hammered her skull. Her grip slipped once, twice. She squeezed harder, her fingernails digging into the soaked bark. Cold spread through her limbs, numbing her fingers first, then her forearms. She tried to pull herself higher on the trunk, but her arms trembled violently. Her legs dangled in the current, still vulnerable to anything the river dragged past. "Stay awake," she whispered, or thought she did. The words barely formed. A surge hit the branches below, sending debris crashing against the trunk. The impact nearly tore her loose. She gritted her teeth and held on, pressing her cheek to the wet bark. The smell of mud and sap filled her nose. She needed to get higher. Her right knee screamed with every attempt to move, but she forced herself upward inch by painful inch. She hooked her elbows over a thicker ridge and hauled her chest onto a higher section of the trunk. Rain ran down her sleeves in streams. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. The storm drowned out every other sound until she heard a faint call cutting through the roar. "Hello? Anyone there?" She lifted her head, blinking through rain, but could see only the swirling blur of water and darkness. She tried to shout back, but what came out was little more than a hoarse breath. Lightning flashed again, headlights, far away, up on the road. The beam swept across the riverbank, then disappeared behind trees. She forced air into her lungs and shouted again, "Here!" It was barely a sound, but it was all she had. The headlights reappeared. This time, they paused. A flashlight beam probed the slope, moving slowly, steadily. It passed over her, then snapped back. A voice cut through the storm. "We see you! Hold on!" Relief hit her so hard it nearly loosened her grip. Two rescuers in bright jackets began descending the muddy bank, roped together, bracing carefully with every step. The river hissed and snapped at their legs. Mud slid beneath their boots. One reached the base of the fallen tree and planted himself against the roots, leaning into the trunk for support. "Ma'am, I'm coming to you," he shouted. She couldn't manage a nod. She could only cling. The rescuer climbed onto the trunk, testing each step. Rain streaked down his helmet. His partner held the rope tight from above. He reached her side and knelt low, stabilizing himself with his free hand. "You're doing great," he said, raising his voice over the storm. "We're getting you out of here. Just stay with me." He tossed a rope across the trunk. It landed just beside her arm. She reached for it clumsily, fingers numb and shaking. The first attempt failed. He guided it closer. "There you go. Loop it under your arms. I'll hold you steady." It took everything she had left. Her muscles obeyed slowly, trembling through the motion. When the rope crossed her chest securely, the rescuer tugged to check the hold. "Got it. Hold tight. On my signal." He raised his hand to the partner above. The rope tightened instantly, pulling Martha upward. The trunk shifted beneath her, and her legs slipped into the current. She let out a sharp breath of fear. "Hold on," the rescuer called. The rope strained. Mud slid. The tree groaned. The river pulled. But the rescuers pulled harder. Martha's body lifted, sliding across the trunk until she felt hands grab her jacket, then her arms, then her waist. The rescuer above hauled her toward the slope, bracing his boots deep into the mud. When her feet left the water entirely, her body went limp with relief. Not weakness, surrender. Her cheek pressed against the rescuer's shoulder, rain mixing with tears she hadn't realized were there. "You're safe now," he said, his voice closer, steadier. "We've got you." She didn't answer. She couldn't. But for the first time since the river took her, she believed him. The rescuers half-carried, half-slid Martha up the muddy bank, their boots sinking ankle-deep into the soaked ground. The slope was steeper than it had looked from the river, and the mud pulled at their feet like thick glue. One rescuer braced himself against a tree trunk, leaning his body weight backward while helping lift her with both arms. The other climbed carefully ahead of them, guiding the rope line upward, shouting to unseen teammates above. Martha tried to help. She tried to lift her own weight, tried to stand or at least push with her left leg. But her right knee wobbled beneath her like a hinge loosened by years of strain and now shattered by the river's violence. When she attempted to put weight on it, the joint buckled sharply. A cry escaped her, raw and involuntary. "I got her knee," the rescuer below her said, adjusting his grip so she wouldn't twist it again. "Just lean on me, Mom. Don't try to walk yet." She nodded, though she wasn't sure he saw it. Rain blurred her vision. Her hair clung to her face. Every breath she took felt like air scraping across bruised ribs. The world tilted and spun, a mix of adrenaline and exhaustion that made every movement feel detached and dreamlike. They reached the top of the embankment, where the ground leveled into the broken edge of the road. Flashing lights from multiple emergency vehicles turned the rain into streaks of red and white. The storm distorted every sound, making sirens and shouted commands blend into an overwhelming roar. Water still rushed across parts of the road, though not deep, runoff from the fields and hills above. As they laid her gently on a tarp near the roadside, a paramedic knelt beside her immediately. He wore a headlamp that cut through the rain in a narrow beam. His gloved hand touched her cold cheek. "Can you hear me?" he asked, raising his voice to compete with the storm. "Yes," she managed, though it sounded more like air than speech. "We're going to warm you up. You're extremely cold. Do you know your name?" "Martha," she whispered. "Martha Garrison." "Good. And do you know where you are?" "Somewhere near the creek," she said, though even that felt like a guess. Her mind felt wrapped in fog, the shock still working its way through her. "That's all right," the paramedic continued. "You've been through something intense. Stay awake if you can." He placed a thermal blanket around her shoulders, tucking it tightly. Another responder slid something under her back, a board or mat, to keep her from lying directly on the cold ground. The paramedic then checked her pulse, shining his headlamp briefly across her face. "She's shivering hard," he said to someone behind him. "Knee injury, possibly dislocated or fractured. Get the splint ready." Martha blinked, trying to focus. "I'm sorry," she murmured to no one in particular. "I didn't think it would happen so fast." One of the rescuers beside her leaned in. His helmet dripped with rain, and his jacket looked like he'd been swimming in it. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady but gentle, "no one expected it. This whole valley's under water." Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating his face for a brief moment. He was younger than she had thought during the rescue, maybe early 30s, streaks of mud across his cheek from where he'd wiped his face without realizing it. "We barely made it through some of the crossings ourselves," he added. "You didn't do anything wrong." She wanted to believe him. But guilt had a way of gripping people at moments like this. She thought of the warning the truck driver had shouted. She thought of her daughter's text. And she thought of how quickly she had dismissed her own instinct to stay home. Her breath hitched. She felt tears mix with the rain on her cheeks. The paramedic tapped her shoulder lightly. "Martha, we're going to look at your leg now. It might hurt for a few seconds, but we'll be as gentle as possible." She nodded, bracing herself. He cut the soaked fabric near her knee. Cold air stung the exposed skin. Even through the numbness of hypothermia, she felt the swelling, a deep, throbbing ache radiating from the joint. The paramedic pressed lightly around the kneecap. Martha winced. I know," he said. "Try to relax the leg." He examined it carefully, speaking quietly to another medic. "Severe strain or partial dislocation?" "She's lucky it didn't break when the current twisted her." Lucky, she thought. The word felt heavy as the water that had swallowed her car, as heavy as the guilt still lingering in her chest. Someone brought a portable heater closer, shielding it with their body to keep the rain from extinguishing it. Warm air blew against her blanket, slow and tentative, but still enough to fight back against the deep cold that had settled into her bones. A female paramedic crouched beside her, placing 2 fingers on Martha's wrist. "Your heart rate's up," she said. "Normal, considering what you've been through. We'll get you stable." She glanced over her shoulder. "How far out is the ambulance?" "On its way," someone answered. "Slow going with the water." Martha closed her eyes briefly. She felt waves of exhaustion rolling over her, urging her to drift away just for a moment. "Martha," the female paramedic said, touching her shoulder again, "don't fall asleep yet." "Stay with me." She forced her eyes open. The world blurred and sharpened with every blink. "I'm here," she whispered. Another flash of lightning illuminated the road. The guardrail a few yards away was bent sideways at an impossible angle. Debris lay scattered across the asphalt. Branches, broken fence posts, a child's plastic chair, a tire without its rim. The storm had not spared anything. One of the rescuers who had pulled her from the tree knelt beside her again. He removed his helmet, revealing short, soaked hair plastered to his forehead. "You did everything right," he told her. "Most people who get swept off the road don't make it to anything solid. That tree saved your life, but holding on the way you did, that was all you." She stared at him, her eyes glassy. "I couldn't let go," she said softly. "I just couldn't." "You didn't," he replied. "And that's why you're here." For the first time since the river took her, she felt the smallest flicker of warmth inside her, not from the heater or the blankets, but from the truth in his words. The ambulance arrived shortly after, its lights casting long shadows across the soaked pavement. The medics transferred her carefully onto a stretcher, adjusting her leg so the splint didn't shift. Rain continued to beat down, relentless and cold, as they loaded her into the back. From inside the ambulance, she could still hear the river, even though it was far below the road now. Its roar echoed against the hills, a reminder of how close she had come to disappearing into it entirely. As the doors closed, sealing her away from the storm, she exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. It was shaky. It was painful. But it was hers. The ambulance jolted forward slowly, its tires pushing cautiously through the shallow currents still sweeping across the road. Inside, the world felt strangely quiet compared to the chaos outside. The rain no longer fell directly onto her. The roar of the river was muffled, but Martha could still feel it, the rhythm of the water, the weight of it, the shape of each surge that had dragged her under. It lived somewhere inside her now, stitched into the muscles of her shoulders and the ache of her injured knee. The medic sitting beside her kept checking her vitals, adjusting the heated blanket wrapped tightly around her. The warmth stung at first, painful in the way cold limbs protest when heat returns. She winced as feeling crept slowly back into her fingers. "You're doing well," the medic said, watching her face carefully. "Your temperature's coming up. That's the most important thing." Martha nodded weakly. The ambulance rattled over rough patches of pavement, places where water had torn sections of asphalt away. She stared at the ceiling, trying to keep her breathing steady. The cold still gripped her chest, and every inhale felt like drawing air through wet linen. "How long was I in the water?" she asked, her voice thin. The medic hesitated. "Longer than most who survive," he said carefully. "Those flash floods hit hard. You fought through a lot out there." Fought. The word didn't feel right. She hadn't fought so much as clung. The water had done the rest, carrying her where it wanted, dragging her under, spitting her out. But she didn't argue. She didn't have the strength. The ambulance turned, its engine straining as it climbed a hill. She could feel gravity shift, her body pressing slightly deeper into the stretcher. Lightning flickered outside the fogged rear windows. She closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She hovered somewhere between waking and drifting, her mind snagging on fragments of the river, the cracked window bursting, the cold hitting her chest like a fist, the tree trunk under her cheek, the rope tightening under her arms. She opened her eyes again, startled by the sudden memory of a sound, a low, distant rumble. It pulsed through her chest before she realized it wasn't memory. It was thunder. "Storm's still overhead," the medic said, "but the worst of it is moving east." She swallowed hard. A tremor ran through her jaw. "I thought I was going to die in there," she whispered. The medic nodded slowly, not dismissive, understanding. "Most people in flash floods don't make it out, but you held on, that matters." She looked at him, tears welling despite the cold. "I shouldn't have gone out. I knew the weather was bad." He didn't correct her. He didn't offer hollow reassurances. Instead, he adjusted the blanket again, tightening it around her shoulders like someone tucking in a child. "People make decisions with the information they have," he said softly. "Nobody expects the road under them to vanish." The ambulance slowed suddenly. The medic stood, bracing himself with one hand against the wall. "What's happening?" Martha asked. "Roadblock," he said. "Still flooding farther ahead." Voices outside exchanged instructions. The vehicle reversed carefully, turning onto a different route. The delay stretched the trip, adding minutes that felt like hours to a woman already teetering on the edge of exhaustion. When they finally reached the hospital, the storm had eased into a steady, heavy rain. The ambulance doors opened, letting in a gust of damp air. Lights from the emergency bay reflected off puddles in distorted streaks. Nurses and paramedics moved quickly, guiding the stretcher into the brightly lit entrance. Inside, warmth greeted her like a long-lost friend, too bright, too sudden, too real. The contrast made her dizzy. A nurse spoke to her gently while cutting away the last of her soaked clothing. "We need to warm you properly. Your temperature's still low." Her trembling worsened for a moment as the cold air of the room hit her damp skin, A heated gel blanket was placed over her chest, then her legs. The warmth seeped down into her muscles, slowly, painfully. She clenched her teeth as sensation returned to places where the cold had numbed everything. Doctors examined her knee next. They moved it carefully, bit by bit, asking where the pain spiked. She answered through groans and sharp breaths. "Severe sprain," one doctor said. "Possibly a partial ligament tear. Lucky it isn't worse." Lucky. There was that word again. Her ribs were bruised, her shoulders scraped raw, her hands cut from the broken window. But she was breathing. She was conscious. She was not one of the names that would be listed in tomorrow's news report. Hours passed in fragments. Blankets, warm fluids, lights, hands adjusting equipment, voices asking questions. She drifted in and out, her mind resurfacing in brief waves. A nurse brought her water. Another checked her blood pressure. A doctor placed a brace around her knee to keep it stabilized. At one point, she asked the time. "Almost midnight," a nurse answered. "You came in not long after 8. 4 hours. Portions of it were gone from her memory, swallowed by shock and cold. "Has anyone called my daughter?" she asked, her voice cracking. "She's on her way," the nurse said. "She's been trying to reach you since the storm started." Martha closed her eyes. Relief hit her like another wave, but this one warm, grounding. She didn't hear her daughter arrive. She only felt a hand wrap around hers, squeezing tightly. When she opened her eyes, tears blurred her vision. "Mom," her daughter said, dropping into the chair beside the bed. "Oh, God, I thought—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Martha squeezed her hand weakly. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm still here." Her daughter leaned forward, resting her forehead against the edge of the bed. Her shoulders shook silently. For the first time since the river took her, the weight of everything she had endured finally broke through. The fear she had buried, the cold that had tried to pull her under, the moment she thought the tree would slip from beneath her, all of it surfaced in a single sob that shook her entire chest. Her daughter stood immediately, holding her carefully. "You're safe now," she said. "It's over." But Martha wasn't sure. Even wrapped in warmth, even surrounded by the steady rhythm of hospital machines, she could still feel the river somewhere inside her. A memory carved deep, a reminder of how close she had come to leaving this world without warning. She took a slow, shaky breath, letting it fill her chest fully for the first time since the storm began. It wasn't over, but she was alive, and that was enough. Martha didn't sleep that first night in the hospital. She drifted in and out of a fog, but true rest never came. Each time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed fragments of the river, the sound of the logs slamming into the SUV, the cold punching into her lungs, the moment her grip nearly failed on the fallen tree. She would jerk awake with a tiny gasp, her fingers curling instinctively as if grabbing for bark that was no longer there. Nurses checked on her regularly. Her daughter stayed in the plastic chair beside the bed, wrapped in a hospital blanket, refusing to leave even when staff gently suggested she rest. The storm raged less outside now, just rain tapping the windows, but every tap still tightened something inside Martha's chest. By early morning, the clouds thinned enough for a faint, colorless dawn to appear over the parking lot. The world outside looked washed out, pale, the way landscapes look after something destructive has passed through. A nurse offered breakfast, but Martha managed only a few sips of warm tea. She felt hollow, like the river had taken something intangible from her and left heavy residue behind. Her daughter spoke softly. "They're saying the river crested overnight. Roads are still closed. Some houses got hit hard." Martha looked at her hands. They were swollen, scratches lining her knuckles like tiny red threads. She turned them slowly. Did anyone else get swept off the road?" Her daughter hesitated. "Yes," she said. "Some didn't make it." Silence settled between them, heavier than the blankets draped over Martha's legs. Later that morning, a doctor arrived to review her condition. He adjusted the brace on her knee, checked the swelling, and explained the recovery plan. "A ligament strain this severe will take weeks," he said. "You'll need assistance for a while, maybe physical therapy." Martha nodded. She already knew. Her knee felt like it no longer belonged to her. Every movement reminded her of how violently the river had twisted it. "You're fortunate," the doctor added. "Flash floods usually don't give people second chances." She wanted to say something, to agree, to disagree, to acknowledge how close she had come, but the words didn't form. When he left, Martha let her eyes drift toward the window again. Rain still streaked the glass. Drops gathered, merged, slid down in crooked lines. She watched them, finding patterns in the movement the way she once watched her husband whittle wood shavings from a block, letting his hands learn the shape before he carved it. Her daughter squeezed her hand. "Mum, why did you go out?" Martha breathed slowly. "I thought I could beat the storm. It was just supposed to be a short drive. I've seen floods before." She shook her head faintly. "But it wasn't like the floods I knew. It came too fast." Her daughter pressed her lips together. "The weather now, it's different. Stronger." The comment lingered in the air, uncomfortably true. By afternoon, a police officer came to take a statement. He was gentle, respectful, understanding. He asked where she had entered the crossing, what she remembered, how long she estimated she'd been in the water, how she managed to reach the tree. "I didn't manage," she corrected softly. "The river pushed me there." He nodded, scribbling in a waterproof notebook. "That tree saved your life." "It did," she said, "and so did the rope." He closed the notebook, then hesitated. "Ma'am, if it helps, you're not the only one who got caught yesterday. The water swallowed a lot of crossings too quickly. Even some of our units had to pull back. It helped, but only a little." That evening, when the storm had finally weakened into a distant rumble, the lead rescuer, the one who'd crawled along the fallen tree to reach her, came to visit. He still wore his uniform, still carried the tired lines of a man who had been working non-stop, but he managed a small, warm smile. "You look a whole lot better than when we first saw you," he said, stepping into the room. Martha smiled faintly. "Thank you for not giving up on me last night." "We didn't even consider it," he replied. "Not once." He pulled a chair closer, sitting carefully. "I wanted to tell you something. When we were making our way down that slope, we almost lost footing twice. If you hadn't held on as long as you did, we might not have gotten to you." She absorbed that quietly. "I didn't have a choice," she whispered. "Letting go wasn't an option." He nodded. "Sometimes that's all survival is, choosing one more second." He chatted briefly with her daughter, then rose to leave. Before he stepped out of the room, he turned back. "You did everything right," he said. "People underestimate what these floods can do. You lived. That's what matters." When he left, a silence settled again, but this time it wasn't as heavy. It was softer, more reflective. Later that night, Martha asked her daughter to help her sit upright. The brace made moving difficult, but with careful support she managed. She looked out the window again, not at the rain this time, but at the sky beyond it. Clouds parted enough for a single streak of fading gold to appear along the horizon. "I thought I'd never see this again," she said softly. Her daughter wrapped an arm around her. "You're going to see a lot more." Martha's breathing steadied. The storm had taken her car, her sense of safety, and her physical strength, but it had given her something else she didn't yet have a name for, something that whispered in the silence between raindrops and heartbeats. She wasn't the same woman who had left her house the afternoon before. Something inside her had been stripped down and rebuilt, not with youthful confidence, but with clarity. She now understood, in a way only those who've been pulled into deep water understand, how thin the line is between control and surrender. She leaned back against the pillow, eyes half closed. "I'm not afraid of storms," she said quietly. "But I know now, they don't wait for you to be ready." Her daughter nodded. "Then we'll be ready next time." Martha exhaled, long and steady. "Yes," she said, "next time we will." In the days that followed, the water receded, leaving behind mud-stained fences, uprooted trees, and roads carved open like deep scars across the valley. News reports confirmed what Martha already felt in her bones. The July 2025 flash floods had been one of the fastest rising disasters Central Texas had seen in decades. Entire communities were shaken, families mourned, and dozens of survivors spoke of the same thing, how the water seemed to arrive all at once without mercy. From her hospital bed, Martha watched footage of the places she knew so well. The low crossing where her SUV had been taken was now a broken channel of debris. The guardrail that once traced the road's edge lay twisted on the rocks, and the pecan tree that had saved her life was barely visible on the bank, half buried by mud. Doctors said her knee would take months to heal. Her bruises would fade long before her sleep stopped replaying the moment the window burst. But the storm had not broken her. It had revealed the depth of her will, the quiet, stubborn strength built from 7 decades of living. And Martha understood something now. Survival wasn't about outrunning nature. It was about refusing to let go when it mattered most. If you've lived through a flood, storm, or dangerous moment in nature, share your experience in the comments. Your story might help someone else understand what these events truly feel like.